This is Belmont, a pretty and early example of an 18th century seaside villa in Lyme Regis, and the latest project for building preservation charity, the Landmark Trust. Two former residents make Belmont particularly interesting: a remarkable 18th century businesswoman called Mrs. Eleanor Coade, and the renowned author John Fowles. Mrs. Coade gave the house its distinctive appearance, and the Landmark Trust's involvement with Belmont arose to enable John Fowles' wish that after his own lifetime his home could be the inspiration for others that it had been for him. Now Landmark plans to restore Belmont and make it available to everyone for holidays. We need your help to raise the money to do so. Mrs. Coade was born in 1733. During a long life, she became a respected and renowned name in 18th century architecture. She never married, making her achievements as an entrepreneur all the more impressive for her day. Mrs. Coade devised a formula for an artificial stone known as Coadestone and used to mass-produce statues and architectural decoration.
The property which this artificial stone has, above natural stone, of resisting frost and consequently of retaining that sharpness in which it excels every kind of stone sculpture, renders it peculiarly fit for statues in parks and gardens, also for tombs and monuments in the churchyards of this or a severer climate.
Mrs. Coade employed the best sculptors of the day to produce the models for her wares. The light buff-coloured results looked just like natural stone and were both cheaper to produce and more durable. All the great architects of the day sought out Mrs. Coade's manufactory in Lambeth and used her products in their buildings. Today, Coadestone still adorns many of Britain's finest buildings, towns and landscapes. And yet today, Mrs. Coade is hardly known outside the circles of architectural historians. All traces of her London manufactory were swept away during the construction of the South Bank complex in the 1950s. We have no known portrait of her, just a few handfuls of so-called catalogues, loose-leaf sheets advertising her products. So the only place left to remember and celebrate Mrs. Coade is here at Belmont, her seaside villa from 1784 until her death in 1821. Its front elevation provides a fine display of her wares. A head of Neptune, god of the sea, and this one unique to Belmont, presides above the front door, flanked by cheerful sea creatures. The ground floor windows each have a head representing Amphitrite, sea goddess and wife of Neptune. The rest of the decoration is also made of Coadestone, the swag frieze, even the urns on the parapet. After Mrs. Coade's death in 1821, the house was lived in by a succession of other residents until around 1883, when the freehold was bought by G.P. Dr. Richard Bangee. Dr. Bangee transformed the little villa into a substantial late Victorian family home. He added 2 large wings to the sides and covered the rear with conservatories. A keen amateur astronomer, he also built this observatory tower. Its winding gear to rotate the roof cap is still complete. After the Bangees, the enlarged house proved impracticable for modern life and declined through the 20th century. Most of the Victorian additions were removed during the 1960s, leaving unsightly remnants. In 1968, Belmont was bought by author John Fowles, who had already begun the love affair with Lyme Regis that would last for the rest of his life. It was at Belmont that John Fowles completed his book, The French Lieutenant's Woman, in his writing room here on the first floor, with its glorious view of the Cobb, the breakwater on which the book's heroine so memorably stood. In 1999, John Fowles wrote down his aspirations for the house.
I strongly believe that it is every successful author's duty to try to share the wealth he or she has been lucky enough to gather during their lifetime. I have always been very happy here in Lyme Regis. My affection for this area is so great that it has become for me like some sort of shrine or church. The usual destiny for large houses and gardens in Lyme these days is to be bought up as hotels. I am determined to avoid this and hope that the house and 2-acre garden may have some kind of permanent educational function.
On the advice of his wife Sarah, John Fowles turned to the Landmark Trust as a means of realising these wishes. He died in 2005. In 2007, the Landmark Trust exceptionally was able to buy Belmont thanks to a timely legacy from another Landmark supporter and the generosity of John Fowles' widow, Sarah. We did this both for Belmont's association with Mrs. Coade and in order to fulfil John Fowles' wish for it to be enjoyed by others. Landmark has spent 4 years developing a restoration scheme based on exhaustive investigation. In May 2011, full planning and listed building consents were granted for our plans. This scheme will return the cluttered rear elevation to its appearance in Mrs. Coade's lifetime, based on careful building archaeology and on this photo of the house taken from the Cobb in 1850. The observatory tower with its winding gear will be kept as an important example of its type. We will open up key views into and out of the site, both along the coastline and back from the Cobb. The garden will remain a green lung in the townscape, and careful pruning and clearance will allow the house to be seen. This detached stable block will become an exhibition room, accessible to the general public. Inside the house itself, we will reinstate lost partitions to recreate the original floor plan. This room will become an easy access ground floor bedroom, and we will move its Coadstone embellished chimney piece back to the upstairs drawing room where it was originally. This little room, which will have fine sea views, was probably Mrs. Coade's parlour. Paint analysis has informed our scheme, and here, for example, we have found the original late 18th century decoration. The stairs are decorated with tiny paterae of female heads, also of Coadstone. These stairs and the back hall were altered in the 19th century, and these too we will return to their original form. This first floor room was the grandest in the house, with much Coade decoration, now blurred by later layers of paint. It was once Mrs. Coade's drawing room, and it was the room where John Fowles did most of his writing. But at this first floor level, the fragility of the house today is all too apparent. These windows, with their Coadstone frieze, have to be propped to prevent their lintels collapsing. The same is true of the windows in the bedrooms along the front elevation. Indeed, it is the Coadstone that has best survived the centuries, as moisture trapped behind the render is causing it to separate from the stonework beneath. All the consents we need are now in place. Only through use as a landmark, and only with your help, can the legacies of Mrs. Coade and John Fowles be perpetuated and celebrated. But we need to raise over £2 million. Please help us if you possibly can. Every donation of any size helps, both in its own right and as an expression of support to help us attract matching funds from grant-giving bodies. Belmont deserves to become a site of national importance for Britain's literary and applied arts heritage. Please help us to make this a reality.